Hey, everybody, Off the Mic Sports Network here. Another edition of Off the Top Rope. So I did talk about this from Collision. One of the big segments of the night, Kazuchika Okada, was officially named into the Don Callis family. That wasn't really the biggest part of this whole story and this whole situation. I shared my frustrations with how that whole storyline played itself out, with Okada just going into the Don Callis family really without any explanation whatsoever. Just sort of abruptly leaving the Elite, which really wasn't, like fleshed out. But the big piece of this is Kota Ibushi is back in AEW for the first time in, I think it's been, 2 years at least, or a year and a half or so. I think he did an event. I think it was Wrestle Dream in 2023 was the last time he showed up. And Ibushi and Kenny Omega, they go way back to their times in Japan as the Golden Lovers, the big tag team. So it's cool to see Ibushi. And if you've ever watched Ibushi wrestle, the guy's incredible. The guy is really an incredible wrestler. Does things in the ring that you just don't see. His striking, his high flying. He's very unique in what he does. And I think it's really cool that he came back to AEW. Now, the prospect of him returning on Collision was a little bit weird to me, because if you were going to go this route and you wanted to get, because I've seen the argument from a lot of people within the community saying, well, this is going to get more people to watch Collision because they don't know what to expect. Okay, so here's the flaw in that argument. The flaw in that argument is, if you're going to say, well, you don't know who's going to show up on Collision, well, then you've got to live up to that billing every single week. Because if you don't do that, and now people come in and tune in and it's just the same old show with just a bunch of matches, they're going to go away. So why not maybe have a build or something, or have Ibushi show up after that Mark Briscoe match in Mexico? That would have been a way to go. That would have made this at least semi-palatable, even though I think Kenny Omega being off television it doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world that they've done. I know a lot of people have shit on some of their creative decisions of having like matches on Collision, but listen, this was a really big deal. And if you were going to do this type of return, don't have it be unannounced. Don't have it be, if you're trying to get people to watch on a week-to-week basis, you've got to draw people in. And you're not going to draw people in if you just throw Kota Ibushi, who hasn't been on AEW television in almost 2 years, and basically be like, hey, here he is in a random segment. And yeah, I'm excited at the prospect of seeing Kota Ibushi take on Kazuchika Okada. I don't know if that's going to happen on an AEW show, because here's what they did out of the Collision match, the Collision segment. They said Ibushi's going to be on Dynamite. Why couldn't it have been the other way around? Why not do that? That would be a better way to get people to watch your show. Like, a shock return out of nowhere when a lot of people don't watch the show is not exactly the right way to go about this. That being said, I do think it's very cool that they are tapping into Kenny Omega's history to kind of, cover the gaps of what I was concerned about, is Omega not being there, and basically being written off of television, which there are some flaws and some inconsistencies within kayfabe, because Will Ospreay's on television despite being injured and kicked in the head with thumbtacks, but Kenny Omega because of his diverticulitis. And I understand those two things are not the same, but you could have had Will Ospreay not be on television too. Like it's just, but it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. But this whole argument that I was frustrated with is that, listen, I think it's cool that they may try to make Collision like a thing by, having Kota Ibushi show up and confront Kazuchika Okada. And by the way, Ibushi looks in unbelievable shape. Probably in some of the best shape of his career. He's not getting, he's in his mid 40s, I think, or something like that. But he's been around and he's been doing this, and he's taken a lot of punishment on his body. And he had some injuries. That's the reason why we haven't seen him. But it's just like, man, if you're going to do that, at least build to it. If you have the shock return on Dynamite and then maybe listen, I may have been, mad about something related to him, being in a random match on Collision, but at least you're building to it. At least you're building to it, right? And, have him face a Callis family member on Collision. There's 75 members of the Don Callis family. You couldn't do that? And they'll probably end up doing it on Dynamite. But if your goal is to get more people to watch Collision, my whole thing is why just, abruptly have a shock return like that? And then the fan base from the sickos are just arguing, saying, well, maybe that'll get more people to watch the show. How? How? The shock return happened. So now basically you're setting a precedent of, oh, okay, we're gonna have shocking moments here all the time. And you can only do those so often. So why not use this is what I've always said about Collision. Why not use Dynamite as a vehicle to get to Collision, and then Collision can be a vehicle to get it back to Dynamite? Because Dynamite has been positioned as the A show of this product. If you're just going to use, like, you have to figure out what Collision is. And they haven't been able to figure that out since CM Punk left. That's the whole problem here. And I'm not outraged that this happened, but this whole narrative that's being said, like, oh, they're doing this, they're trying to make Collision a bigger show. Well, if you were going to do that, why not actually put some effort? Like, half this card, or almost all of this card, was put together on Friday night before the show. So a match with the world champion was booked at 4:30 Eastern time in the morning on Saturday. Literally, like 12 hours, literally, I'd say around 15 hours before the bell time. Like, that's just not how this should go. So cool moment, but very questionable about how their creative path has been used with this show. And if you're trying to make that argument to me that, hey, this makes Collision more meaningful, no, you threw a random return on there. It's like, you got to make both shows feel special. And if you start building to matches and you start doing these throughout the week, like, remember when Kenny Omega faced MJF on an episode of Collision 2 years ago? And it was for, MJF to pass Omega's record as longest reigning AEW champion. Why not do stuff like that on Collision? Or why not be like, hey, Kota Ibushi returned on Dynamite. Let's show you what he can do against a Don Callis family member. That would have been a better way to handle this. So cool moment, but like I said, it could have been handled a little bit better. Anyway, thanks so much. I'll see you guys. Bye.